Peter's chair thus implies an office of no political nature, not by a priority of time, but essentially by our Lord's promise and guarantee that by the one unifying aspect of the essence of the living universal church, the church continues succession and authority. At 6 minutes 42 seconds, Cabane questions Cyprian's relaying that heretical faith has no access in Rome. Again, that it is in the past tense, he points out, isn't relevant because the object it predicates is in the present and is being landed upon by the heretics. Now, Cabane does point out that those who cannot have faithlessness are the Christians. For our purposes, it's worthwhile that this is continuing the point made earlier and is talking about the Christians now, but not the Pope. His response is contrived and desperate. How can the faithful remain out of heresy? Do they teach themselves? No, they are taught by the bishop. If the people apart from the Roman Church do not fall into heresy, but themselves are not the source of doctrine, and themselves rely on being taught from another, and Cyprian has already told you that they are the throne of Peter, it is also that teaching authority, and thus the throne of Peter, which is immune to heresy, lest you believe the Roman citizens themselves are infallible, or all themselves unable to lose the faith, in which case the office of the bishop and the throne of Peter was never necessary in the first place. Giles relates succinctly on the meaning of Cyprian's praise. Cyprian says that Cyprian says that the Roman Church is impervious to heresy, unquote. Giles, document 39, the chair of Peter, the principal church, 61. Also in C.S.E.L. 3, Cyprian, AD 252. So Cabane's response to Epistle 54 and on Unity 4, though I appreciate his analysis of the language, betray the context of Cyprian and clearly miss the mark. They also lead to impossible contradictions and ignore his fundamental teachings. Orthodox theologians refute the autocephalous interpretation of Cyprian's pure thought. The autocephalous system is not intrinsically compatible with Cyprian's thought, contrary to what Cabane has picked up from various Anglican polemics. Orthodox theologians readily concur and enforce such facts, as well as Cyprian's reliance on the Church of Rome in his thought. As the eminent Afanasieff relays in Meyendorff's Primacy of Peter, according to his doctrine, there should have really been one single bishop at the head of the universal church. For as he continues, quote, according to Cyprian, every bishop occupies Peter's throne, the Bishop of Rome amongst others, but that the See of Peter is Peter's throne par excellence. The Bishop of Rome is the direct ire of Peter, whereas the others are ires only indirectly and sometimes only by mediations of Rome. Hence, Cyprian's insistence that the Church of Rome is the root and matrix of the Catholic Church. Unquote. Athanasius, See of Peter, Meyendorff, pages 98 to 99. It is abundantly and arguably clear that the Anglican polemics that Cabane relies on to reinterpret Cyprian are both inconsistent with Cyprian's Ecclesiology and are recognized as such by very prominent Orthodox theologians. Athanasius concludes, quote, I have dwelt at length on the interpretation of Cyprian's theory of the Church for two reasons. As I have said above, the first was to formulate the principle of a universal theory of the Church. More important still, this shows that if a universal theory of the Church is adhered to per Cyprian, the doctrine of primacy will somehow be a necessary concomitant. A single body must be crowned by a single head, showing in his person the unity of the whole system. If we take the universal theory of the Church, we cannot refute the doctrine of universal primacy just by saying that the Church has Christ as head, that it is an indisputable truth, and supporters of primacy do not themselves oppose it. Unquote. The See of Peter, Meyendorff, pages 99 to 100. This most prestigious autocephalous theologian admits, but does not take for his own theory, Cyprian's clear teaching of the pyramidal hierarchy of the universal church. He concludes, quote, "If the universal church, as Cyprian saw it, can be compared to a truncated cone, we must admit that the upper plane is in fact above the multitude of local churches." Unquote. Abed, page 99. Cyprian's hierarchical ecclesiology directly leads to the Catholic conclusion, and an inability for the autocephalus to give an answer. Cabane denies this or reinterprets Cyprian by 20th century Anglican polemics, and is unfortunate. The facts of the matter remain. Cyprian's ecclesiology is vastly incompatible to autocephalous approaches, and is ultimately fulfilled in slow development and fulfillment in a unifying papacy. 3 minutes. Cabane evidently believes that because it can be shown that all share in Peter's chair, then he has proven his position, but he hasn't, as I have said earlier. This is already affirmed by the Catholic ecclesiology on the local level. All bishops share locally in the chair of Peter, and, or in a sense iconically, Peter in that diocese. The issue is when you stop there, Cyprian's work isn't intelligible, as we've shown. Cabane quotes a Catholic scholar to prove this latter conception of the local chair of Peter, and of course no problems there. At 8 minutes 8 seconds he gets to the conclusion of this point, saying, "Unity of Peter equal unity of episcopate," and Catholics already affirm this. The question arises, where is the essential present source of this unity? Cyprian said it's the throne of Peter, which is principally in the Church of Rome in the 54th epistle. That this was only in the past is absurd and untenable. Cyprian in another work says Rome is the, quote, place of Peter and the degree of sacerdotal throne, unquote, Epistle 51. And he also calls Rome the sacerdotal chair. He says, quote, "At Rome in the sacerdotal chair," and it's also in Epistle 51. He further calls Rome the, quote, "womb and root of the Catholic Church," unquote. This is quoted in Clarke, Letters of Cyprian, page 75. And as Rome having the, quote, honor of the priestly throne," unquote, Epistle 72. That he doesn't refer to the Rome on the unity of the church is to be expected. He's talking about the church as a whole, and not about the Church of Rome in particular, which hierarchically has, as we've seen already, a very Catholic view on. I can't comment on your quotation of Robert Eno, for you don't, like the Protestant commentators on many blogs who quote him, give a source. What I will say is that even if Cyprian believed himself to be equal to Stephen, it would only contextually be equally on the local level. On a mere opinion he said everyone was free to disagree on. You can, through the writings of Firmilian, know with certainty that Stephen thought otherwise of himself. On the council's positions with respect to Stephen, it has been in fact drawn on by Chapman, Ritzel, Grissart, Ernst, Bardenhauer, that they didn't even have Stephen's letter. It is further noted by Rivington that many African bishops of the council, both in and after it, favored Stephen. Thus the idea of Cyprian uniting Africa against Stephen, as is commonly portrayed by Protestant and autocephalous polemicists, is falsified. Now to Cabane's remaining point. At time slot 1022, regarding the quote, "To be in communion with Cornelius is to be in communion with the Catholic Church," Cabane responds as if I've not read the epistle, its context, or anything even slightly relevant in Cyprian's writings. His overconfidence and own failure to study the context is therefore all the more tragic here. Cyprian's reasoning for holding Cornelius to be the true bishop against Ovation are fully detailed. Cyprian's arguments commission him to inform Cornelius that, quote, he now communicated with him, that is, with the Catholic Church, unquote, but had afterwards wavered. It is evidently implied that if he did not communicate with Cornelius, he would be outside of the Catholic Church. Cyprian continues that he had waited for a formal report from the bishops who had been sent to Rome before committing all the bishops of Africa, Numidia, and Mauritania to a decision, in order that, when no doubt could remain, all his colleagues, quote, might firmly approve and hold your communion, that is, the unity and the charity of the Catholic Church, unquote. It is certain that Saint Cyprian held that one who was in communion with an antipope held not the root of the Catholic Church, was not nourished at her breast, drank not at her fountain. That the entire unity of the bishops of Africa, Numidia, and Mauritania, and of the Catholic Church is, quote, decided by the Bishop of Rome and the Church of Rome, unquote, per very respected scholar Chapman. This, without a doubt, supports the context I presented in, and furthermore completely undermines the local conception of unity as falsely presented by the disconnected autocephalous churches. Thus, the quote among all others of communion with Cornelius and its context favors the Catholic position and undermines completely the autocephalous conception of local unity. As Prusak relays, Cyprian, quote, considers communion with the Bishop of Rome to be synonymous with the unity and the charity of the universal church, unquote. Prusak, Ecclesiology Through the Centuries, page 135. In conclusion, it is clear that Cabane's insistence on the local chair of Peter in Cyprian's writing is not a problem and is in fact already affirmed by the Catholic Church. It is only a problem for the autocephalous churches who see the chair, and Protestants likewise, of apostolic succession as a temporal or transient source of solely local authority and not an essential successive source of the universal church as such. Only this essential approach is consistent with Cyprian's language in On Unity 4, the 54th epistle, the nature of the other apostles' own authority past, Peter's position over the apostles, and our Lord's promise of a perpetual, authoritative, and protected universal church. Though Cyprian did not have a church like the fully developed and articulated one of the modern age, he clearly had in mind a hierarchical Catholic ecclesiology which would from there develop fluidly into the one we have today, and have splintered regionally of the various separated autocephalous churches. The autocephalous churches remain in error and in schism and are lost to their limited and political approaches in the Holy Fathers, St. Cyprian most assuredly included. And that's the end of the video, and God bless.